Okay, so the next types of angles we're going to move on to are called, there's corresponding angles, alternate angles, and interior angles, and we'll introduce each of them separately in a moment. But first of all, in order to introduce them, I have to draw this diagram here. And this diagram is just a drawing of two parallel lines. So we see when we've got two lines with these arrows pointing in the same direction like this, it means that they're parallel. Okay, so two parallel lines, and this line we call a transversal. I'll just write that down here. So a transversal is just a line that crosses other lines. So it transverses these other two lines, or it crosses these lines. That's all it means. So that's the transversal, and these are both parallel lines. So as we said before, whenever two lines cross over each other, they create four angles like we had up here. So when the transversal crossed this first line here, it created 1, 2, 3, 4. But then when it crossed this other line over here, it created another four angles. So we'll call this one 5, 6, 7, and 8. So altogether, with the two parallel lines in the transversal, we've created 8 angles. Okay, so some of those angles you may recognize from above. So for instance, 1 and 3 are vertically opposite each other. Two lines that cross over create vertically opposite angles. 1 and 3 are vertically opposite. 4 and 2 are vertically opposite. Down below here, 5 and 7 are vertically opposite. 6 and 8 are vertically opposite. Supplementary angles. 1 and 2 sit on this one parallel line here. They add up to, if we were to draw a little circle, semicircle over it, they add up to 180 degrees, or a straight angle. So they are supplementary angles. As are 3 and 2, if we put them together, they would add up to 180 because they're both sitting on this line here, the transversal, on this side of it. So they're supplementary angles. As is 4 and 1, 8 and 5, 5 and 6, 6 and 7, 7 and 8 are supplementary angles because they're lying on this one of the parallel lines here. They're lying on this side of it, and adding them together would give you 180 degrees also. Okay, so in order to make this, I suppose, more understandable, let's introduce some numbers. If we take it that this is an obtuse angle, and I'm going to say it's about 135 degrees, just for the sake of argument, 135 degrees there. What I'm going to tell you is, whenever you draw something like this with two parallels and a transversal, there is only ever two sizes of angles created. Out of the 8 angles that we created here, all of them are either going to be 135 or some other size, but there's only 2 different sizes created. So we know that this is 135, but 1 and 3 are vertically opposite, which means vertically opposite angles are equal, which means angle 3 must be 135 degrees also. But we've already said that 1 and 2 here are supplementary angles, which means when we add them together, they must add up to 180 degrees. Well, if they have to add up to 180 degrees, then if I take 180 and subtract 135 from it, I get 45, don't I? So this must be 45 degrees. And we can see these two I already mentioned are supplementary also. 135 plus 45 equal to 180 because they're lying on this side here of the straight line, the transversal. But then also, this must be 45 because 3 and 4 are supplementary, or you could say this must be 45 because it's vertically opposite to angle 2, so that's 45, so this is 45. So all of that so far is clear to see, I think. Okay, now, as I've said, all of the angles here are going to be, all of the 8 that were created are going to be either 135 degrees or 45 degrees. So if that is the case, when we go down here, we know immediately just by looking that this is an obtuse angle and this 6 is an acute angle. So if these have to be either 135 or 45, well, 5 must be 135 degrees then, because that's an obtuse angle greater than 90. And 6 must be 45 degrees because it's an acute angle, it's less than 90. And 5 and 7 are vertically opposite, so that's 135 degrees. And 6 and 8 are vertically opposite, so that's 45 degrees. So we can see that if you know just one angle out of the 8, you can figure out what the other 7 are. Okay, so our next thing is, what are these other terms, corresponding, alternate, and interior angles? So the angles, the corresponding angles for a start is when you draw two parallel lines like this and you create 4 angles here and 4 angles there. If you look closely at them, you will see that these angles here really are a mirror image of these angles up here. They're identical. They're what we call in maths congruent angles. They're exactly the same size angles as this. So 5 is exactly the same size as 1. If you took this and you placed it on top of it, you'll see it would fit just perfectly. The lines would line up. 8 is identical to 4, 7 is identical to 3, 6 is identical to 2. Or if you think about it in terms of position, the one in the top left down here is equal to the one in the top left up here. The one in the bottom left here, which is 8, is equal to the one in the bottom left here. Top right, bottom right, bottom right. And these pairs of angles are corresponding pairs of angles. So just write it down here. Corresponding angles are equal, I'm supposed to be technically correct, equal in measure and if I was to list some pairs of corresponding angles in this, well, 1 and 5 are corresponding angles, 4 and 8, 2 and 6, and lastly 3 and 7. They are pairs of corresponding angles. Okay, the next one is alternate angles. So alternate angles, there are only 2 pairs of alternate angles. We see there are 4 pairs of corresponding, but in this drawing there are 2 pairs of alternate angles. And alternate angles are always on opposite sides, alternate sides of the transversal, opposite sides, and they're in between the parallel lines. So if we can see number 4 and number 6, they're on opposite sides of the transversal and they're in between the parallel lines and they're equal in measure. They're both 45 degrees. And then the other pair of alternate angles is number 3 and number 5, because they're also on opposite sides of the transversal and in between the 2 parallel lines. So again, alternate pairs or alternate angles are equal in measure. And in any of these diagrams there are only ever 2 pairs of alternate angles, and in this case we said 4 and 6 and 3 and 5. Okay, and lastly, interior angles. So our interior angles they're inside the parallel lines again, and they're the ones like 3 and 6, which are not equal in measure, but they do add up to 180, these interior angles. 135 and 45 makes up to 180. So interior angles. And we have 3 and 6, it's a pair of interior angles, and then 4 and 5 also a pair of interior angles. And these let me see now, sorry, like I was saying, the interior angles, these are the interior angles, but you may, usually not in an Irish context, but if you were looking up on the internet, you may see the alternate angles referred to as alternate interior angles, just because they are also in between the parallel lines here, but they're on opposite sides or alternate sides of the transversal. So if we just say interior, we're talking about these 2, but if we say alternate interior, these 2. But in Ireland, generally speaking, when we say interior we mean these, and when we say alternate we just mean these 2, and we don't say alternate interior or interior alternate.